Great. Thanks, Becky. Thanks for the overview, and welcome back, everyone. We're very happy to have you join us for the third webinar in the 2016 Ship Lean Training and Mini Project. I just want to provide you with a quick rundown of what we'll be doing with today's webinar. John will be teaching us about the concepts of building a lean culture, Kaizen as a lean tool, and some more about lean metrics, which we talked about during our last webinar. We'll spend some time hearing about your projects, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions before you get started with implementation. And finally, we'll talk about what comes next in this training course and beyond. As always, we'll have time for questions and answers at the end, but we encourage you to use the chat box to ask questions throughout our time together today. To start things off, we want to hear from you. You recently completed your project charter, and we're interested in knowing, did the process of filling out the project charter help your team define the scope of your project? Your answer choices are yes, we feel more confident moving forward with the project after completing the charter. Somewhat, it may have been just as easy to tackle the mini project without completing the charter, or no, the charter seemed like an extra step that didn't provide us with much value. So if you could please select an answer there from the screen, that will help us get started today. Okay, looks like we're slowing down a bit. So a vast majority of people, 75% of the teams, felt very confident moving forward after completing the charter that it was a useful task for them in getting this project underway. And then there were just a couple of teams in each of the other two areas, some that didn't seem that it provided much value, and some that felt like they might have been able to just start the project without completing the charter. So John, I know you had some great feedback for the teams with regards to their charters in your review process.
Yes, I did. Thank you, and good afternoon to everybody. Welcome to the third webinar. And before we get started, as Sarah mentioned, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the project charters that were submitted overall. I was very, very impressed with the types of projects that were selected. I thought they were really projects that mattered in your facilities, and that you identified some specific issues that were real in your facilities. And some of you may have bit off a little bit more than you could chew, but we'll see how that goes. But overall, I was very impressed. I think as a group, we've done this for three years now. As a group, collectively, I think your project charters were the best that we've had so far. So I want to just congratulate everybody on going through that process. For those of you who didn't find it of value, hopefully as you go through the project and some of the issues that typically creep up during that process begin to happen, hopefully you'll look back and say, going through the project charter helped us really define what we're looking at, made sure that we had the appropriate metrics so that at the end of the project, we know for sure that what we did had an impact, and we can measure that and prove that. I thought the project charters were very well thought out. We talked about each one of those different boxes that you had to fill out, and just trying to get you to think about the different areas. And I think I thought you did an excellent job at just thinking through what some of the assumptions were, what resources you'd need, what kind of a team you were going to put together. And again, I thought that was very good. And then finally, we'll talk about it more today. I thought the metrics were really much better than I expected. You identified, I think, some key metrics. We have to remember that this is a relatively short time period for a project. And so some of the measurements are applicable to your project. They may just not, in this time frame, be able to show some of those results. But I think maybe further down the line, those metrics will will indeed show that the interventions that you had were successful. So I just want to say again how great you guys did on the project charters. I finished up this morning getting feedback to everybody through Moodle on their projects. I generally just gave you some suggestions on different things to think about from my perspective and working with quite a few other facilities, or hopefully gave you some additional resources that you could tap into on your projects. And again, we'll talk about it later with our phone call technical assistance, but I want to reiterate that please don't hesitate to give me a call or email me if you have further questions as we go on with the project moving forward. So I think that's it with the overview of the project charters.
Yeah, we did have one other poll question here for folks. We are going to spend some time today. John's going to talk a bit more about measurements, and as he indicated, he was very impressed with the measures that you identified. But we're interested in the course of your developing your project charter with regards to measurement. What was the most difficult part of identifying your project measures? Was it finding benchmarks to measure against, narrowing down the appropriate measures from all of the possibilities, outlining the process for data collection or data access, or determining who would be in charge of collecting and managing the data? We did receive a flurry of questions in the Moodle TA forum, which was fantastic, and we strongly encourage you to continue to use that. As you post questions there and John is able to provide you with feedback, everyone has the opportunity to learn from that. So if you are comfortable with it, we encourage you to continue to use that platform as your means for getting technical assistance so everyone can benefit. But we know that the project measurement can sometimes be a bit of a stumbling point for teams, and so we're interested to know what was the most difficult for you. All right, great. Well, it looks like we have a relatively even split between those first three. So benchmarks was somewhat difficult. A few teams had a difficult time narrowing down the appropriate measures, and I think, John, you alluded to that a little bit. Sometimes in the biting off more than you can chew measures, the expansion of the number of measures you're looking at can sometimes also lead to a little bit of project creep into maybe some of your areas that are outside the scope of your project but seem to be related at times. And then outlining the process for data collection or data access, whether you currently have those measurements available to you, if you are using data from your electronic health record, if you have other data points in your system, financial or otherwise, how you get access to those on a routine basis can sometimes be a deterrent as well. So thank you for that. That's very interesting.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I'm not surprised by the results on the poll. What I find in working with facilities and folks in different projects is that the metrics are probably one of the harder parts for folks to figure out and to really nail down which metric is appropriate, how do we collect that data, and how do we benchmark and know where we should be. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on the agenda. But I would just say that it's developing and getting used to metrics in these lean projects is just like any other skill. You'll be much better at it after you go through this project and begin to learn the different components of it and how it might be best measured. And the only way to really get good at it is to keep doing the projects and keep looking at what other folks have done, case studies, so forth, and building that skill. But there's really no magic bullet and nothing that's crystal clear on how to do some of these metrics. And sometimes you have to just really think out of the box and be creative about what you're going to look at and how you're going to measure it. So let's take a look at today's agenda. We're going to talk about building a lean culture, which is a very important part. As you'll see, I'm going to be very strong on talking about the lean culture because it's such an important part of building a platform in your facility to sustain lean and lean thinking over time. We're going to talk quickly about the concept of Kaizen and what it means, and really the whole, again, culture of continuous quality improvement. We'll talk about the lean metrics and just kind of go over some of those things. And then, as Sarah mentioned, we'll have time for questions and answers and sharing of some project information or project topics, etc. So with that, let's get into building a lean culture in your organization.
So to start things off, just one more. We've got a poll question back there. No, that's okay. Before John jumps into talking about a lean culture, we want to know, does your team have plans for integrating your learnings from this lean training beyond the completion of your mini project? Have you thought about how you'll be able to take the things that you learn here and integrate them? And so your choices are, no, we haven't thought about our long-term plans for implementing lean. Yes, we started to think about it, but we don't have concrete plans for how to integrate lean into our processes. Or yes, we plan to fully integrate lean into our processes and organizational culture. Great. There's some great participation on this poll. That's fantastic. So we want you to be thinking about your answer to this question as we move through today's webinar. We'll be pulling our answers back up later as we talk about kind of what comes next during this training and beyond.
Well, it's great to see that people have begun to think about and put plans into place to transfer what you're learning in this mini project across the entire organization. And I can tell you from experience that the things that we've talked about over the first two webinars are really just the tip of the iceberg of what we're talking about in making a big transformation to lean thinking in your facility. The technical tools that we've talked about, the 5S, the value stream mapping, standard work, mistake proofing, all those different tools that are in the lean toolbox are really just a small percentage of what it takes to be successful as an organization in lean and lean thinking. Most of that, most of the hospitals that are very successful at creating this culture really concentrate on how they develop a lean management system. And if you don't develop that management system of creating that culture, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that culture really means, your chances of sustaining lean and lean thinking over time and methodologies will simply become unsustainable. like in most projects, you'll take off and everybody be excited, and then gradually the momentum will fade and you'll go back to what you're most comfortable with in your culture. What we're really trying to do when we talk about developing this lean culture is getting to a point where people in your facility don't look at doing lean as an additional project. They really begin to look at it and they don't even really think about, oh, we're doing lean. It's just about how we do our work each and every day. And one of the issues that we find when we first go into facilities is the fact that we get resistance because people think it's just one more thing they have to do on their plate. And again, we try to work them through that process of developing and understanding that lean can help them do their job more efficiently, more effectively. It's better for your patient. It can reduce frustration, increase satisfaction, and just become the way you really do work in your organization. And that's the goal of what we're trying to do when we're looking at developing this lean culture. So when you really think about implementing lean, you really have to focus on both the technical side, which is the tools and techniques that we talked about. And again, we just talked about 4 of those in the last webinar, and there's certainly plenty more beyond that. But you also have to look at the social side of it and tools and techniques for developing a learning organization. How do you build teamwork? How do you empower employees, particularly on the front line, to be able to identify and solve problems on their own? And really, how do we engage the employees to really grasp and fully engage in what we're trying to do with eliminating waste. And the culture really changes, we hope, makes a change in focus from a traditional culture where in many cases it's provider focused. We have functional silos. We reward individuals. We manage from the office. And really what we want to do is build the characteristics of a lean culture where, again, we look at the voice of the customer. We're always looking at things from the focus of the patient. That we're always looking at highlighting problems. We're not dancing around them. We're not creating workarounds. That the process is always visible. That we're really looking at our processes each and every day and how we can make them better. That we have respect for people. We'll talk a little bit more about that, a key concept in lean thinking. That we're looking at root cause analysis and not just looking at the symptoms. And hopefully with your project charters, you begin to look at and drill down as you get into your projects that many times we focus on the symptoms of the problem instead of really digging down into the core root cause of what's causing problems in our processes. And again, we want to decrease waste and have process-driven results as we go. So that's what we want to try to move towards in the development of a lean culture. The good news is that healthcare people really get lean. I mean, healthcare is all about diagnosis and treatment of illness, and lean is really about the diagnosis and treatment of processes. So for the most part, I think lean, people in healthcare really get lean and can relate to it. Again, our goal is always to create those new eyes and look at things in a different way. And hopefully we accomplish starting to do that with some of the waste walk activities that we had to do. If you look at any organization, whether it be in healthcare or manufacturing or any industry that has used lean successfully, what you'll find is they've concentrated a great deal of their effort on what the Toyota Motor Corporation termed as respect for people. It's really looking at and having respect for the people that are in your organization, helping them to grow and learn and develop, helping them to build their capacities, to develop systems of coaching and mentoring people, to really listening to people on the front line and respecting their opinion and what they have to bring to the table, making sure we're communicating with them, making sure that people feel like they're doing meaningful work. Used to be, and I think it still is to a large part, people felt compelled, felt a calling to healthcare. When you really connect to that value, you'd be really surprised at how much people will change and do things differently when they really connect to a meaningful job, and it's not just something they're showing up for to get a paycheck. So we want to engage people in the process. We want to have what they call the Toyota way, respect for people, to make sure that we understand each other, that we build this mutual respect and trust in our teams and in our organization. Again, we want to stimulate personal and professional growth, and we want to maximize individual and team performance. That's really what we're looking at when we're looking at the basic tenets and concepts of respect for people. When you look at any organization that's a high-performing organization, what you'll see is that high performance really comes from individual breakout performance. And that's really what drives a high-performing organization. And what I mean by that is that too many times I think we focus at the organizational level and trying to create a breakout, high-performing organization. But that can never happen unless we help individuals individually develop their own breakthrough performance and becoming better and better each day. And when you get that collectively, that's when you get your organization to really have breakout performance. So no organization will be great unless they develop what we call influential leaders at every level of the organization. And who are those influential leaders? They're people on the front line. They're the experts in how the job is done and how the job process works in your facility. And again, we want to engage those people in feeling like they have a voice and that they can participate in the concepts that we're working on in Lean, and they can solve problems and be able to really develop that culture that we're looking for. One of the keys to lean culture is that it's not management telling the staff how to improve. It's really the other way around. It's really when you develop this kind of a culture, it comes from the bottom up, and people in the front lines are constantly sharing ways that they can improve the processes within their organization. And certainly senior leadership needs to listen to that and to be, again, looking at how they can develop that culture within the organization. Another characteristic of this lean culture is we have small groups of teams reflecting each and every day on how they can improve the value stream or the processes and make it just a little bit better today than it was yesterday. And again, we have leadership focused on how to develop this lean management system and helping people to be problem solvers each and every day and how to engage folks in that process. If you look at the research, about 62% of initiatives that fail in the facilities fail because of senior leadership commitment. And again, that's why we want to make sure that even though this is a bottom-up approach to developing culture and problem solving, I don't want to underestimate how much power there is in making sure that senior leadership is on board, because you'll find in your projects and as you move forward, this is not easy work. It gets tough, it gets personal sometimes, and the senior leadership has to be able to weather that storm and to be committed to moving this forward regardless of how hard it really gets. Successful organizations that we have worked with really focus in on developing a self-sustaining lean culture. What I mean by that is they train people to be in-house experts. They send people to get training in either being a yellow belt, a green belt, black belt. It's okay to have a consultant help you get off the ground, but you shouldn't rely on consultants. And here's a consultant saying this to you. You shouldn't rely on that for the long term. Why? Because we want to build that capacity within your own organization to be able to look at and be self-sustaining over time. And the only way you can do that is to create the experts within your facility and to make sure that you're providing them with the training and expertise to do lean and to create the culture that you're looking at. When you're looking at developing this lean culture, as I put on the slide, it's really not for the faint of heart. For most facilities, you're looking at probably a 3 to 5 year journey to really change the culture of your organization. So that's why I put it there so people don't get discouraged that it's not moving fast enough or it's not going as quickly as you thought it might. To really change the culture, the research shows that it's going to take somewhere between 3 to 5 years. And usually you get to a tipping point within that 3, maybe 4 year period. You usually start off what you see there on the slide on the left-hand side. What you're really doing now is you're doing the proof of concept. You're showing, you're doing your project, and people are going to be watching and seeing, you know, does this really work? Is this just the new flavor of the month? Is this just going to pass by? So we really want you guys to have excellent results. That's why we always encourage facilities when they get started to take on projects that they know that they can be successful at, that they can show that the process really does work. And again, people are looking for that. They're looking at whether or not this is going to work. And so you get to the next phase, which is cautious learners and serious students. When you begin to have more and more success with lean, you get the people who say, you know, I don't know if I believe this, but if I see results, I might become more interested in it. And so you develop these believers and non-believers. And again, in that, there's some tension of really looking at why doesn't everybody get on board. And we'll talk a little bit about change management here in a second, but it's really that stage where you get to the tipping point and the momentum starts going downhill, and that's when you really create the management system. You create the culture of lean. It's just what you do on a daily basis, and you really don't even talk about it as lean projects anymore. It's just the way that you do business. To be able to do that, again, it takes persistence. It takes winning one heart and soul at a time. It takes patience because you have each individual comes to the realization of how this might work and improve their job at a different pace. And from my experience, some of the people that have been most resistive in the beginning have become some of our strongest advocates once we could show them the results of some of our projects and the tools that we use with Lean. You'll know you're getting there when employees are engaged in identifying and eliminating waste each and every day. Again, I mentioned persistence. Some of the lessons learned from implementing lean thinking in facilities. Again, commitment has to come from the top. That you need to expect resistance from physicians, clinicians, and staff. That's just part of the process. That you should look for opportunities to engage your physicians and clinicians. Usually, initially, it's fairly difficult, but they're watching the projects, and when they begin to see that you can actually pull together some significant improvement in processes and improve it for your patients, they begin to become more interested. And certainly they love the data element of it. If you can show them with the data what you've done and how you've improved the process, that's when we start getting buy-in from physicians and other clinicians. Again, it goes back to building this culture of constantly looking for waste in the 8 different areas that we learned about earlier, and making sure that employees have the opportunity to identify that waste and to do something about it. And again, the lessons learned are when we go through that process and we engage people to do that, it really does help break down some of those silos that we see in hospitals between departments, because people begin to look at the value stream instead of looking at things from their specific department. One of the harder parts of developing this culture is really building in accountability. Looking at human performance and behavior is not easy, but to be able to sustain lean performance over time, accountability has to be part of the equation. We have to hold people accountable for what they do or what they don't do, and again, it's a difficult area to work through, but it's a major component of building that lean culture. Another lesson learned is that when you build a culture, we really begin to help people develop a fact-based decision-making. And hopefully you got a taste of that when we ask for the metrics that you're going to use before you even start your project. Because again, we want decisions to be based on what facts are presented, what data is being presented, to be realistic about what's going on. That's why we do GIMBO walks or waste walks, so that we can understand what the current process is and make sure that we're dealing with the root causes of issues to that process. And again, internal transformation, making sure that we're providing the skills, the training, the coaching, the mentoring to develop those in-house experts, because they're going to be the internal change agents of the facility, to really look at how we can transform that culture. Let me just, before we go on to the concept of Kaizen, just talk a little bit about, again, this issue of culture. There's a quote that I really love, and it goes like this. At first it was Deming, then Geron, and now Lean is our savior. When will we ever learn? The answer is behavior. And what we mean by that, or what that quote means to me, and as you all know, I'm a big fan, believe very strongly in the concepts and tools of Lean, but I also understand that the behavior of our workforce and that collective behavior really is the culture of our organization, is really what counts and what really drives high-performing organizations. And we've done a lot of work with organizations in this area, really looking at how do we identify behaviors, how do we identify different types of behavior styles in our culture. We've used a tool that's from Profiles International that helps us identify the different behavioral styles of people within our organizations. And there's basically 4 different types of behavior styles. One is a kind of a driver. They like things fast-paced. They're very decisive. Generally, usually a CEO will be a driver. Then we have people that are expressive. They're very optimistic. They're very spontaneous. They're always want to be recognized for their accomplishments. Then we have people that are amiable. They're the ones that want to get along. They make the great team supporters. They are a little slower to change, but once you give them the reasons for that change, they're usually right on board. And then the 4th style is analytical. Those are the people that are very process, task-driven. They're the ones that handle the details. And again, understanding these different types of behavior styles and how they mix with each other is really a key in developing your culture and understanding how your team fits together. Because if you think about it, if you're high in one of these styles, behavioral styles, when you communicate to other people, you're missing the mark probably 75% of the time. So you have to be able to learn how and identify different behavioral styles and how you flux your communication to those people. And again, when we're talking about change management, some of these behavioral styles, once you understand what it takes to help them change, things will go a lot better in your organization because you understand how to pull people through that change and help them feel comfortable. You'll have people like drivers who just want to change for change's sake. But again, the bottom line here is understanding your culture and really putting a plan, a management plan together to help develop that culture and to understand that culture and help that culture work together. That's a real key of lean and lean thinking. We're organizations that I've worked with fall is really not understanding this part of the equation and how crucial it is for the overall success of the organization and for making this lean culture. Too many times I get pushback from CEOs and other folks who say this is kind of the soft side of the organization because it's more difficult to identify some of these skills and how to develop teamwork and understand how we relate to each other in our behaviors. But it really is not the soft side of organizational development. It really is what separates you from being an average organization to being a high-performance organization. And then again, it goes back to this concept that you cannot get breakout organizational performance without breakout individual performance. So I'll leave the culture there and see if there's any questions when we get to the end, but culture is a big part of being able to be successful in lean and implementing the methodologies of lean. So let's go to the concept of Kaizen. Kaizen is the concept of lean, again, the Japanese word, and we'll talk about what it really means. But I want you to think of Kaizen kind of like this. If you could improve what you do today by 1%, do you think you could do that? And when I ask that question, of course, people say absolutely. So if you could improve 1% on a consistent basis, where would you be in 1 year? You'd be 365% better. That would be considered breakout performance. And so when we're talking about this idea of Kaizen, it's a small, incremental, consistent improvement over time. And when you do that, it can really turn into substantial performance improvement by your organization. So what does Kaizen mean? It means change for the better. Sometimes you'll hear it as break it apart, put it back together. Again, it's small incremental improvements that add up over time. It's a very powerful tool in lean concepts and an important one in developing your culture. So again, the Kaizen, you're going to hear different terms about Kaizen Events, and generally what those refer to are specific events or specific short-term improvement projects. Again, but the whole concept behind it is that we can make the change right away and improve it right away. And when you get everybody in the organization doing that, you can really get to some breakout performance. A lot of the Kaizen events, kind of Kaizen activities, are what we would call low-hanging fruit. When you, again, get people to identify waste and be able to see that, you can use Kaizen, again, to make the changes right away to some of those segments in the process where you're not adding value to the patient. And again, we're just looking at how you can do that on a consistent basis and have that mindset of constantly looking how you can improve what you're doing on a daily basis. When you look at Kaizen and Kaizen events, they usually have a very specific focus, and it's usually on a very short period of time. They're very kind of intense bursts of activity for a specific action. There's a bias of action or analysis or waiting to get approval, and it's usually done by cross-functional teams that are committed to the improvement of that particular process. Again, when we look at Kaizen events, just like when we look at value stream mapping, we always want to look upstream and downstream on the process and make sure that we have people who are represented from upstream and downstream in that process as part of the cross-functional team that's looking at this particular Kaizen event or project. And again, it never hurts, in my mind, to have somebody from the outside who's not particularly part of that process or the issue that you're dealing with, that can look from a fresh perspective on and ask questions about why do you do it this way. Those have always, I think, been very valuable in the organizations that I look. So what's the main benefit of Kaizen? We develop a whole frontline team of people who are problem solvers each and every day. And again, we can use simple tools like A3 to do some of these Kaizen, more complicated Kaizen events. But the goal is for us to develop this culture of consistent, ongoing, small, incremental changes and improvement each and every day. Kaizen in healthcare is really all about problem awareness and being able to kind of admit and acknowledge our problems. Sometimes that seems easier said than done, but we really want to reward people for bringing problems to the light, and look, instead of looking at ways to work around those problems. So again, we want to, it's really a mindset and a culture of this continuous improvement on a daily basis. As I mentioned earlier, I fully believe that the people in your organization are your ultimate competitive advantage. And Kaizen and Lean are really deeply interrelated concepts. Again, we want to engage everybody to look at and identify problems and to begin to be problem solvers on their own. the concept of Kaizen. Again, a very, very powerful tool to get the people interested in being problem solvers. And again, the concept, I think, is very well described in just that 1% improvement each day, and how that builds up over time and really creates breakout results over a longer period of time. So let's go to the next item on the agenda, which is the lean metrics. And as we discussed earlier, metrics is probably one of the most difficult part of any lean project, of being able to identify which measures to look at, how do we collect that data. But we know for a fact that projects where performance is measured will almost automatically improve just by the fact that they're being measured. We've seen that with in healthcare with reporting of quality data to CMS. The mere fact that people reported the data, we saw from the research show that they had a huge jump in some of their quality outcome measurements. So it's important to be able to measure what we do, not only to know what works, but to know what doesn't work. And sometimes, we talked about last time, we implement countermeasures into a particular problem, and then we're off to the next thing, not really knowing if it actually solved the problem or not. So why do we measure? It's the successful cornerstone of any significant success in improvement. It doesn't, the measurements really don't have to be time consuming. We don't have to have a lot of measurements, but we need to select the key measurements that we need, the ones that really tell us and get to the heart of the issue that we're trying to deal with, whether that be the elimination of the 8 different kinds of waste or some of the other categories that we'll talk about here in just a second. You know, I talked about earlier that there's no magic bullet in how to measure some of these projects, and that we have to really sometimes think out of the box and look at things differently. And I've seen all kinds of different ways to do that. And so you have to be creative in how you look at measuring some of these projects, whether it's pedometers to measure motion and movement, or creating just a simple little training. Some of the projects that were submitted dealt with supply issues, and one of the ways that I suggested they may measure some of those things is to send somebody into the treatment room or